All right. By all likelihood, we are live and online. So that's excellent. Warm welcome to you, live from Brussels. This is András Baneth speaking. And I'm so pleased to present to you this information session on the 2021 EPSO competition on agriculture and rural development specialist, which is a very unique exam. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first time EPSO has ever organized a competition on this very topic. So this is great, and it's a fantastic opportunity for everyone who's involved in the field, and no pun intended. So with that, why don't you please type into the chat box where you are dialing in from. This has become sort of a custom for us to launch webinars of this kind to see how diverse the audience is in geographic terms. And Nepal, oh my God, that's exciting. Okay, you immediately won the competition of dialing in from the furthest away. But most of you I can see are from Brussels, from France, even Ethiopia. Okay, now I won't do the measurement whether Ethiopia or Nepal is further away. Perhaps Nepal wins, but still this is fascinating. And Vietnam, so literally we have everyone from all over the world, and we appreciate that you are dialing in. Hopefully it's not too early or not too late according to your time zone, and that's excellent. So now that you familiarize yourself with the chat box, you are more than welcome to put their questions that my able colleagues Veronica and Lenke will be glad to filter and pass those on to me to make sure that I cover all the issues and all the questions that are on your mind today. Whatever I may not be able to cover, we'll make sure to follow up. So a little bit of a housekeeping, and I'll come back to that. It's regarding the technology. Hopefully everything works smooth. I'm here in our Brussels studio, which is fully equipped with all sorts of backup and reliable network cables. And by the way, this is something that we rent for EPSO candidates. If you have to do the assessment center, the online version, then you can come here and you can absolutely use this for your interview. Anyways, so hopefully the sound and everything is good. As far as I can tell, it works. If it doesn't, just restart your browser. It fixes 99% of the problems, and that it should work fine. You can also follow this webinar on your mobile device, and we are recording everything. We will make it available to you. A little bit about my background. I won't bother you with that. I used to work for the EU, and I'm involved with EPSO competitions as an external helper who is helping you to pass those competitions. And as I said, in case you miss anything, you are going to receive within a day the recording. You will also receive the presentation slides, the ones I'm putting on screen. Obviously, you have now the benefit of asking questions that I will answer live. But if something comes to you when you're watching the recording or afterwards, you're more than welcome to contact our customer support, and they will be glad to share their answer with you. And then we will also do a transcript. So in case you prefer reading it because you are, I would have said you're on an airplane, but these days, most of us are not traveling on airplanes or any other device or vehicle. But if you are more into reading than watching, then you're also able to do that through the transcript. About our company, very, very briefly. So our community is a large community. Over the many years we've been in business, over 100,000 people have used our services or have been acquainted with the tests and the preparation tools we're offering. We have tens of thousands on our Facebook page that you are encouraged to join if you are on Facebook. And then we have a large number of test packages that you can use for your preparation in many, many languages and for all the domains and all the fields that EPSO requires you to sit. We are happy to assist in your preparation. And then an impressive 17 million questions have been used by the various users and candidates, which is a pretty impressive number. And then lots of webinars are available, similar to the one I'm doing right now, but there's also a lot of methodology webinars that you are encouraged to check out. So when it comes to verbal reasoning, or when it comes to the structured interview or any other aspect, you could find a webinar on our website. So with that, I will make available a special exclusive offer for those of you who are committed and courageous enough to stay all the way. I'll try to keep you fully informed infotained and interested in the topic to the best of my abilities. And of course, you are then rewarded with this great exclusive offer, which is applicable to all our online products. So anyways, let's get started. And a couple of basic points, which tend to be fairly common for all EPSO competitions and ultimately the EU jobs that they can yield. So perhaps the first question is, where do you think you will work? Or perhaps rephrase the question, it's not about where you think, but what the institutions are going to offer. Well, chances are you're going to end up working at the European Commission, and more specifically, working at DG Agri, so the Directorate General for Agriculture, which is one of the longest standing and most well-known and well-sourced directorates of the European Commission, given the history of the EU and given the importance of agriculture historically in the European Union. So the place of work is Brussels. It's pretty clear that it's DG Agri. It's not Luxembourg, it's not Strasbourg or any other place, and very specifically the European Commission. Now, technically you could end up working at the European Parliament or in the Court of Auditors dealing with agriculture issues, but the very specific target of this competition is really that you help the staff of DG Agri specifically. All right, what will you do? Well, you will be an EU civil servant after you pass the competition. As many of you might know, EPSO does not recruit. EPSO selects candidates, and you end up on a reserve list once you've successfully passed the subsequent stages of the competition. Once you're on the reserve list, you can be recruited. And once you're recruited, specifically in the European Commission's DG Agri, you will deal with different aspects or various aspects of the European agricultural policy, or common agricultural policy, as it is technically referred to. And what are your tasks? Well, a couple of things which were abundantly clear and transparent in the notice of competition that launched this specific exam. So you'll develop policies and new legislation, which is broad enough. So if it's reformulating the milk sector all the way to issues linked to sustainable agricultural practices, certain aspects of the trade and in agriculture, it really could be any or every aspect of the agricultural policy field that you could be tasked with, depending on your background and area of expertise. Implement and manage existing legislation and programs. Now, obviously, there's a huge number of directives and regulations and other sources of European law that cover the agricultural policy, and that is something that needs to be managed, that needs to be properly run, so the agricultural policy functions the way it had been conceived. This is also supplemented by requiring you perhaps to work on economic analysis and policy perspectives. So it's a common way for civil servants to analyze different aspects of agricultural policy or changes when it comes to issues linked to sustainable agriculture, and we'll come back to that, what that means from the exams perspective and other aspects. And then I mentioned earlier trade agreements. Obviously, the European agricultural trade has a massive impact on many member states' economies, producers, importers, for the entire agri-food chain, the farm to fork strategy, if you will. All of these have important trade aspects with Mercosur, with Australia, with different Asian countries. Some of the countries some of you are currently based in. All of that is a very important aspect of the work. And then contribute to, and I need to read this because it's a lot of stuff, evaluation activities on the performance and the EU added value of measures under the responsibility of DG Agri. Now, that's quite a handful. So basically evaluating the performance of the various policies. So ultimately represent DG Agri in negotiations, both within the institutions, so with the European Parliament, with the member states, with the European Court of Auditors, and certainly with third parties, whether it's the Food and Agriculture Organization, whether it's a World Bank, whether it's United Nations, specialized bodies, whether it's other governments and diplomats. So those negotiations need to be handled. Many things, right? Many things. And some of this you may have never been involved because you are an expert on sustainable agricultural practices, or maybe you're an agronomist. Maybe you deal with agricultural trade or other angles of agricultural policy, which is a great entry point for you to enroll in this competition and then be eligible. And then ultimately, the actual job might have you work on different aspects of agricultural policy. So I see that there are a lot of questions coming in. So I'll pause for a second before discussing the number of places available and other technical aspects. So let me move over to the question list, which I hopefully find on my other screen. There we go. So here are a couple of questions. I see that there is one, and I randomly pick up some questions. What kind of documents are going to be checked by EPSO regarding professional experience? So we'll get to the professional experience part, but typically they would ask you for a declaration on what sort of jobs have you done in the past 3 or 6 years, depending on what is your underlying degree. And we'll get to the details in a moment. But how they check that, they might ask you for some employer certificate. So if you were an employee, they might ask you for some official document that really showed that you were employed from this date to that date. They might ask you for some formal documentation. If you were, let's say, a freelance consultant, that you need to somehow demonstrate that you actually worked on things related to this specific field. So though sometimes it might be sufficient, a declaration on honor, but normally you should have some paper or some document or a publication or a news item or an employer certificate or a social security extract, something that backs up your claim that you actually worked in that time frame and on that specific topic. Other question, yes, I see that the question number 2 was exactly the same. So job contracts or direct contacts, very similar question, which I couldn't answer that differently than the way I just did. And here's one. When applying, we are asked to check a box if we agree for EPSO to share our information with our national authorities. Which authorities are these? Because I do not wish my actual employer or ministry to know that I'm applying. Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't encountered that question before, so I just tell you what I think off the top of my head. I think this would rather refer to a background check in the sense of, do you have a criminal record, or are you, probably a security clearance, because obviously some posts might require a security clearance. Certainly not all, but let's suppose you're dealing with a multi-billion euro trade agreement. So obviously they need to know that you don't have a conflict of interest, and perhaps you are not linked to an organization that you're not supposed to disclose any information to. So my guess is that this is linked to a background clearance, rather than actually contacting your ministry or whoever else and say, okay, is this person really working there? And again, I understand the sensitivity, because you certainly don't want your employer to know that, hey, I'm enrolled in this competition, and then somehow it gets there. So I wish I could 100% reassure you that this is not going to happen. I cannot. You might want to ask EPSO or the selection board directly. There is contact information, not of individuals. Do not contact individual selection board members, but there's a functional mailbox or EPSO itself. Ask them the question, and if you get the answer, please let us know, because this is publicly interesting information. So if you're comfortable sharing that with us, we'd be very grateful. All right, I see that there are 2 more questions. We'll come back to those, but let me advance with my presentation. How many positions are available? Clearly, you see it on the screen. It was in the notice of competition. You have 55 positions available. That's really good. This is amazing. It's a great number because many competitions may have 8, 10, 15, 20, similarly relatively low numbers available. So 55 reaches a critical threshold where your chances are good. And not only good, they're great because the number of potential applicants is somewhat limited, right? This is not just about having a legal degree which would qualify you to apply. It's much more niche. It's much more specific that you need to have a specific profile, either in terms of your background degree or the number of years of work experience in the field. So that significantly reduces the potential number of candidates, and the number of places relatively high. And it's 86. Now, 86, entry level is 85. 86 is one level up. Typically, you would need 3 years to advance to that administrative status. And the salary, and we have a salary calculator on eutraining.eu that you might want to check out. But depending on your family situation, where you are actually hired from, in which country had you lived before recruitment, and a couple of other factors, this can be a salary of 5,500 or so euros net per month. So that's a very attractive proposition given the seniority of the post. So what else? Application deadline, pretty clear, 9th of March. Do not miss it. Do not leave your application to the last moment. Make sure that you fill in everything and you submit your application by the 7th of March and not before. Sometimes the website can crash or you can get a last minute urgent thing to take care of. So make sure that you do not leave it to the last moment. Main question, are you eligible? Take this very seriously because you don't want to be disqualified from the competition for the lack of supporting documents or for making the wrong declaration or ticking the wrong box. You want to make sure that you are fully eligible in the eyes of the selection board members. So what are the general conditions? Those are pretty easy to fulfill. You need to be an EU citizen. You need to have completed your military, if that's a requirement in your country, which is only just a couple of countries in Europe that require that still. And you need to meet the character requirements for the job. So if you have a criminal record or something similar, that might call into question your eligibility or requirements for the job. And I think, again, going back to the question we had, that checking or contacting national authorities probably refers to this, that if they want to check your character requirements, so to say, then they should be able to do that. All right, what are the language rules? And we'll come back to the other formal eligibility rules when it comes to the degrees, diplomas, and your work experience. So, language. Language 1 is typically any of the EU's 24 official languages, regardless of your citizenship. So if you are a Finnish citizen, your language 1 can just as well be Spanish as it could be Romanian or Swedish. So that is really entirely up to you which language you declare as language 1. Independent of your passport, as long as it's an official EU language, so one of the 24. And then language 2 must be English or French. So that's pretty clear, and it has to be different from language 1. So if you declare French as language 1, language 2 could be English. I often say I'm a Hungarian citizen. I'm also a Belgian citizen for some time now, but my main language, really my mother tongue, is Hungarian. And in language 1, language 2 terms, I can very easily declare French as my language 1 and English as language 2, completely independent of my passport or the language that I truly speak on a native level. So that's entirely up to you. You might have the luxury to make a choice what you choose as language 1 and language 2. Make sure that you choose a language 1 in which you're most fluent in absorbing information, kind of passively understanding information, where you can read fast, where you can answer abstract verbal numerical reasoning tests very fast, that's where you can process the information the fastest. Language 2 should then be a language where you can express yourself with the greatest ease. So let's say I probably would choose English because I'm much more comfortable expressing myself in English. Let's say I'm more fluent. I am also fluent in French, but I just don't have that depth or that vocabulary. And I'm giving you my personal example that even if you have the sort of luxury to choose between these two languages, choose the one in which you can write and speak with the greatest ease and fluency. So that's the English-French choice. If obviously one or the other is much more dominant for you, stronger, more fluent, then the choice is pretty clear which one to pick. And then language 1 and 2 must be different. I mentioned that before. Let's look at the qualifications, because this is a major part of your application. First, we're talking about a so-called specialist competition. So this is not a generalist competition. This is a specialist competition. So that means a couple of things. One is that you need to have a special degree from the outset. Or if you don't have that, you need to have some special work experience in the field. So you cannot be a generalist degree and generalist experience. So let's say you have a degree in law or economics, and then you have 3 or 5 years of work experience, having worked in an investment bank or in a consultancy firm dealing with transport, right? That's really not relevant from the perspective of this competition. What you truly need here are basically two scenarios, two things. So you either need to have a degree of at least 3 years, so basically a bachelor degree at least, which is specialized in the field. So you can see that in agricultural sciences, and that's certainly a pretty broad area, but still quite specific area. This is not about engineering. This is not about, well, perhaps bioengineering, biotech might fit under that when it comes to crops and crop science. But again, if you're a civil engineer, that probably won't qualify. And then if you have that specialized background degree, you need also 3 years of experience, professional experience in the field of the competition. And there are a couple of indicators what the field of the competition actually means in practical terms. That was scenario 1. Scenario 2 is you have a general degree, basically any bachelor degree, and it could be law, and it could be musicology, and it could be anything as long as it's recognized by an official EU country and authority. But then you need to have more years of work experience, relevant work experience, and it needs to be 6 years, right? Professional experience in the field of the competition. So either 3 years study, so a bachelor degree specialized and 3 years dedicated experience, or any degree plus 6 years of experience. And certainly there are a lot of gray zones in such areas. So many candidates, and I'll take a look at some of the questions that are coming in. I know you have some unique situations or background where you ask, will it qualify or will it not? Now, obviously, here's my legal disclaimer. Whatever I tell you is not the official information. You need to ask specifically EPSO, who will probably convey your question to the selection board, and they have the authority, legally speaking, to say this qualifies or this does not qualify. I'm not sure whether they do that in advance. So you might be in a situation where you need to fill out everything, hand in the best information you can, and wait for their official evaluation that they tell you whether or not your degree qualifies. In some situations, they're more amenable, more, say, approachable, and they tell you, well, this particular degree seems to qualify. They may not give you 100% legal guarantee that we will accept your degree, but they say it seems, or based on our current evaluation, it seems it fits the profile we are seeking. Yeah, so it's a delicate question where some candidates in other competitions, specialist competitions, have had some challenges, so to say, legally speaking, whether their degree qualified or did not qualify for the profile that EPSO was seeking. So let me take a look at some questions. I see they're coming in. Here are some. So I'm not sure if my degree and or professional experience meet the requirement of this competition. I will submit my application on my EPSO account. When will I know if I'm eligible to take the tests? Well, when they let you know, or let everyone know, that you are now invited to take the tests. And we'll look at that. So depending on the number of candidates, if there are a lot of candidates, they might require you to take a pre-selection test, abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning test, and only then do they check the eligibility of those who passed those tests. If there aren't that many candidates, applicants, they might immediately check the eligibility. But in any case, I would encourage you to submit your application. As long as you are fairly confident that your background, your work experience qualifies you for this particular profile, I encourage you to take your chance and submit your application. And then they will let you know that based on the background, you have been granted the opportunity to sit the tests, or it doesn't meet the criteria we are seeking, and therefore you are disqualified. Yeah. So let's go back. What are does it make any difference if you send in your application very early in terms of the likelihood to be selected? No, it doesn't make any sense. It's not any sense, but it doesn't give you any advantage. So what happens is there is a deadline, 9th of March, noon Brussels time. You need to submit your application until then. They're not even checking anything before that. In the private sector or sometimes in other public service, they might say, we are checking applications on a rolling basis. This is not the case here. So just send in your application whenever it's possible, ideally a day or two before the deadline, and then the process just takes its own life. I mean, takes a life on its own. That's not the same. In some CBT tests, texts are not very clear. CBT, computer-based tests. So the texts are not very clear. Do you think that French and English tests are more accurate? I probably would resort to kind of crowdsource this question, because some language versions of the verbal reasoning may not be that solid. And I guess some of you have had experience with that. So perhaps the Latvian verbal reasoning is not as easy to understand or fluid as, let's say, the English or the Greek. I really don't have experience with that, but some candidates or others may have. There are different Facebook groups that you might want to join, and there are some dedicated for this particular competition, so you can exchange ideas and have others chime in. All right. On the professional experience, yes, at which stage of the selection process the experience is calculated? Beginning, end of the selection process. So which stage of the I see. So I presume what's in the background of your question is that your professional experience is just not enough yet, and whether it makes a difference whether you reach the 6 years, whether it's right now or in a couple of months. That's a very good question, and I wish I could tell you immediately the answer for. I'm not entirely sure. If I really had to guess, I'd say probably by the end of the selection process. So if I really had to guess, but then again, this is something we will look into. And again, if someone has information on that, or someone has asked that question in the context of this particular competition or another one, please put that into the chat box for everyone's benefit. We really would be grateful for that, because I want to give you the most accurate information, and I could just tell you, yeah, it's at the end. But of course, this is a life-changing answer, and I just don't want to give you information I'm not 100% confident of. So again, if I had to guess, probably by the end, or perhaps by the time of the publication of the notice of competition, but there might be some reference saying at the time of the application deadline, which certainly can make a difference for many candidates, whether or not you have reached 3 or 6 years of work experience. All right, here is Natalia saying it is by 9th of March. So if Natalia, you are sure about that, maybe just let us know where you have that information from. Maybe we overlooked that in the notice of competition. There's a reference to that, or you have some other source. We'd be very grateful, because it's a very important question, as we can all relate to. All right, here's another one. If I already passed a CAST exam, CAST is contract agent for specific tasks. So contract agent exam, CAST exam. If I've passed that, numerical reasoning or other, do I need to sit those tests again? Yes, you need to sit that again. You don't really have a test passport or any similar solution that you have done some computer-based tests and that's your score. No, for every competition, you need to sit those tests that are required by that particular competition. Okay, so here I can see that Asha, if I pronounce your name correctly, it's by the time of the application. All right, okay, good. So there's the answer. Unfortunately, my assumption proved wrong, but at least we know we have a concrete answer for this important question. So by the 9th of March, you need to have reached 3 years or 6 years of relevant work experience. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope that doesn't complicate your eligibility chances. What else? Yes, the field of competition. And you could probably do endless puns and word jokes by the word field and agriculture and all the things that are interrelated. We'll stay serious. What is the field of competition? Sustainable agriculture, rural development, forestry, sustainable natural resources, agricultural economics, agricultural markets, and trade. Okay, so this is how they define the field of competition. So your degree and your work experience, when they talk about field of competition, this is what need to be related to. Okay, so let's hope that's clear and get to the next point. Why is this a great opportunity? Now, I probably don't need to preach to the converted, but those who may not yet know the great benefits of being an EU official, a civil servant, salaries are very attractive. I mentioned roughly what you can expect as a so-called AD6 civil servant at the European Commission, roughly 5,500 euros net a month. And again, it roughly depends on a couple of other factors, but it gives you a scale. You get health insurance, which is a pretty generous one. You get to send your kids, if you have kids, to European schools. So there are various perks that come with the job, apart from being an open-ended, you might call it lifetime contract. So it's not a fixed term, but it's an open-ended employment contract. How to get one of these jobs? Well, a couple of tricks, a couple of ideas that I'm going to share with you. But before we get to that, again, let me quickly move back to some of the questions that pop up on my screen. So here's one question that relates to my book. So the 2012 edition of the Ultimate EU Test Book, is it still relevant? With the reasoning tests, the 2012, that was quite some time ago. Yeah, almost 9 years ago. It's probably quite outdated by now, whether the format or the difficulty, and we've applied a lot of expert review to the tests and the questions in the book since 2012. So I would not encourage you to use that as your single source of preparation, whether you're interested in a more recent edition of the book or some tests on EU training. Those are preparing you better for the competition. All right, what else? Question number 9, Veronica tells me, so are the 3 years of professional experience counted after obtaining the degree, or can internship be taken into account? Typically, EPSO or the selection board would only count work experience after you've gained your degree. So you cannot really say, I have 3 years, I studied 3 years and I have 3 years experience, because it went in parallel. So I got my degree and all at the same time I was working full time on these matters. Again, this is the sort of the main rule that they apply. If there's some overlap, again, probably it will not be counted. So that has to be basically 6 years. So 3 years degree, 3 years work, even if you had done some internship as part of your studies or even independent of your studies. If this is a critical point, because otherwise you would not have the sufficient period of work experience, do ask them this question just to make sure. And again, I'm telling you what's the main rule, and typically the answer they would give is Work experience begins after you've obtained your primary degree. All right, what else we have? Question number 10, how strict is the 3 years experience? If the candidate is good, is there a possibility to be qualified with less years of experience? Unfortunately, given still the relatively large number of candidates, EPSO and generally large public administrations, they tend to be really process driven and very formalistic. So while in the private sector, someone might say, well, I was looking for, let's say, my personal example again, if you forgive me for saying that, back then when I was hired into a job that I did for a couple of years, they asked 15 years of work experience. I only had 12. And they said, well, listen, we like you. We're going to hire you. That sort of flexibility would not happen in the commission or in EPSO competitions, because there are many, many candidates. They need to apply these formal rules before they actually look at you as an individual, as a person. So in this case, if you have 2 years and they require 3 years, you're probably not going to be qualified, despite you being the best agriculture expert in the world, or that you had run the WWF for 10 years. Well, 10 years would certainly be sufficient, but if you had been in a senior position at an environmental organization, or you were head of the food program in Africa for an international organization, but you only did that for 2 years, unfortunately, you will not qualify. Okay, what else do I have? Can a PhD in the field of competition considered as professional experience? What a good question. Again, if I had to guess, because I don't know what policy they would have on PhD. I don't think it's considered professional experience, despite the requirement that you need to teach during your PhD, that you need to do research. Despite all of that, if you had not done actual work, paid, remunerated work as part of, or during, or in parallel to your studies, I doubt they would consider that as work experience. And again, I'm not 100% sure on that, what their policy would be. If the timing otherwise would not check out, if your timing would not be sufficient otherwise, again, I encourage you to contact them, because this is it's a tricky question, and the selection board may take a position on that, which might be different from other competitions. So they're not going to say this is the rule for all specialist competitions. But for this particular one, here is how we're going to judge a PhD vis-a-vis professional experience. What else have I not answered? Do EPSO accounts get deleted after a certain time of inactivity? I created one 2.5 years back, but it doesn't exist any longer. Normally they wouldn't delete that, though they might have in their terms of use that after a certain number of, I think it might be more related to GDPR. So the privacy regulations, that if you are inactive with your profile for a year or two, then it needs to be removed for the sake of protecting your privacy. But normally, yeah, it's an easy task that you just recreate a new EPSO account, and there you have it. And then you put yourself a reminder just to log in every 6 months. But if you're interested in competitions and getting a job, then I guess you will log in anyways. Okay, here's a question on Talent Screener, but let me a little bit talk about the Talent Screener, because that's what's coming up in the next few slides. So it's placed in a context in a little better way. Application process. So what is it that you need to do? Well, you declare your eligibility. That's kind of tongue twister. Pick your language 1 and 2, the way I described it, if you have the luxury to pick from different languages that you speak. And the application can be submitted in any of the EU's 24 official languages, which is equality of access and equality of chances. And then comes the talent screener, which you need to answer in English or French. And we have a couple of words on what the talent screener is. I'll get to it in a second. Again, 9th of March is the date that you really want to earmark in your calendar. What is a talent screener? So talent screener is basically a long questionnaire kind of a survey, but it's a long questionnaire that you need to fill in as part of your application. It's a typical way for every specialist competition for the selection board to judge whether or not you're eligible for a given competition. And then you will probably at one point ask yourself, how is it scored? How can I get the most score while being truthful and honest about my background and my professional experience? And that hopefully results in you optimizing your score and getting the most out of it. So a couple of tips, a couple of ideas. Usually they would ask you an open question. Do you have experience in so-and-so, such and such area of sustainable agriculture? And then as long as you're honest, and you need to be honest and you need to be truthful, you're definitely not going to lie, you can certainly enhance certain aspects of your background. You can try to optimize it in the best possible, show your experience in the best possible light. So try to answer yes to as many questions as you can while being truly open and transparent about your background. A typical mistake, and you can read much more about what I'm telling you now. We have webinars, we have tips and tricks articles on our website on the talent screener. I've done an in-depth look of how to optimize your talent screener answers. So look those up when you get there. Hopefully that gives you a couple of good ideas. One of the key mistakes that many candidates do is they're too abstract because they're not specific, not concrete enough in their answers. So always back up your replies with facts, with figures, with achievements, with numbers, with concrete projects. At the same time, do not overload your answers with a bunch of statistics and numbers, but you need to demonstrate your claims. You need to bring what they call proof points to your claims and not just say, I have a vast experience in dealing with plant breeding and integrated pest management. Okay, what is that experience? In which country did you gain that experience? How many years did you work there? What scale or sort of projects were you involved in? You need to provide those details so they make their claims far more credible and ultimately result in points that the selection board will award you. Provide lots of valuable information, but try to leave out the fillers. So don't say cliches that I'm extremely committed to making the world a better place. Great for you, but stick to the subject and really focus on the answer itself. And some questions may seem rather similar to each other in the talent screener. Try not to copy paste all your answers. You can really give a more tailored, a more customized answer to some questions. So not just say, well, as I said in my previous answer, here are the 4 things I did in this particular field. Try to make it more relevant to a given question. A couple of others. Readability is really important. After all, it's humans that will score the answers. So they will read through your answers and they need to understand the structure of what you're saying. Use some bullet points, use some maybe titles. Make sure that the formatting makes it very easy to scan and to read the answers. And then the terminology, try to use some keywords that the EU uses in their own administrative system. So you might want to take a look at DG Agri's annual report. You might want to look at some speeches that the Commissioner for Agriculture has given. You might want to take a look at some policy documents so you're familiar with the terms. So if you are not linked to the EU currently in any way, because you are working in a national administration, in a ministry, or in a third country or international organization, some terms are very different, maybe are not even used. And even some terms which you might be using every day, like sustainability, have a very different meaning when it comes to the common agricultural policy. So make sure that you're familiar with the terminology, because this can have an impact on the score that they will award you. And then try to think about what's in it for them. So they're not ultimately the one who will hire you, because that's head of unit in DG Agri, but they want to know that, okay, this candidate is actually can contribute something to our work, to our policies, to what we're trying to do in European agriculture policy. So say, okay, I can bring my expertise to DG Agri because so and so. So this sort of, call it service attitude of what can you bring instead of I've done this, here's my achievement, I have learned so and so, is not enough. Connect that to the benefit for the commission, benefit to the institutions that your experience can bring. All right, and perhaps the final thing is take a look at the webinar. So there's far more to it than these very quick ideas and tips that I've shared with you, but hopefully that gets you thinking that it's more than just sitting down and writing n'importe quoi, writing whatever, and trying to hope for the best that you're going to get sufficient enough score that you are considered eligible. And then comes the computer-based tests. Now, the computer-based tests, so it's verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning. As I said, it depends on how many candidates there are, but there's always a computer-based test. It depends on whether it's formally part of the assessment center, so it's done at one later stage, or it's done truly as a pre-selection because there are so many candidates that they need to filter some of them out, select them out, and only consider those applications who have passed the computer-based test. In any case, you need to sit this. And what are these? Pretty straightforward. There's a verbal reasoning. As you can see on the screen, there are 20 questions in 35 minutes. Pretty tough given the timing. And you need to process the information fast. There are different ways of doing that. We have enormous amount of methodology, webinars, ebooks, and obviously practice tests on EU training. Check those out so you are fully familiar with these tests. Numerical reasoning, similar in its concept, but it's about numbers and data tables. So 10 questions in 20 minutes. Again, it's the time pressure that makes it difficult, not so much the difficulty of the tasks at hand. And then you have abstract reasoning, which is probably the toughest because it's 10 questions in 10 minutes. So you do the maths, it's 1 minute per question, and you need to process the information really fast. And it's the kind of abstract charts and images that move around according to a certain logic that you need to quickly understand. And then the good news is that the scoring is a bit more flexible for this particular competition. So as you can see on the screen, you have the verbal reasoning pass mark is 50%. And then for the numerical and the abstract, it's a combined score. So if you are really bad in abstract reasoning, but pretty good in numerical, you can still pass with a decent score. You can relatively easily reach 50%. So that's about a computer-based part. But here comes a bit of problem. The pass mark is not enough because you need to get the highest marks. So if it's really difficult, it's difficult for everyone else as well. So in that case, the maximum score will probably be a little lower for other candidates as well. But you do compete against the others, not just against the 50% pass mark. So there's an objective threshold, and then there's a relative threshold compared to other candidates. And then talent screener review. So that's when they actually read your answers of those who have passed and evaluate the scores. And then comes the assessment center, which these days is an interesting, pretty much online exercise. We'll see how the COVID situation might change and how it might affect the assessment center by the time you get there. But you see that about 150, 170 candidates will likely be invited to the assessment center where they evaluate your competencies. And here comes language 2. So from this point, it's language 2, so English or French for these tests. And it's either online or in person. But as I said, these days, it's essentially online, either in a test center where you do the case study, or whether in our studio or your home office or wherever you get reliable and good quality internet connection, is to do a situational competency-based interview, a competency-based interview, the interview in the field, and then a written test in the field. So there's far more information about all of these on our website. We've done a couple of free webinars on the so-called SCBI. I talked about it at length recently at I think it was a Facebook Live event, but we're putting the recording on our website soon, but you can also find it on Facebook on EPSO Ask Me Anything. So there I got a lot of questions about the SCBI, and you'll find my answers there. What is the scoring in the assessment center? You need, again, a minimum objective best mark, so at least 40 out of 80, because there are 8 competencies, and you need to have at least 10 points, or at least 5 points out of 10 for each of these 8 competencies. And then you have the field-related interview, so where they really ask you about your experience, your background, mostly based on the talent screener, but not exclusively. So they can ask you anything related to the subject matter at hand. And there you need to have at least 25 points out of 50. And then there's a written test with the same approach, 25 points out of 50. So based on all these points, whether you have the competencies and you have the knowledge, or you're able to apply your knowledge in the context of the competition, all of this will be aggregated, and they decide whether they want to put you on the reserve list or not. Hopefully they do. And once they do that, you're among the 55 lucky and high achiever candidates who are on the reserve list. And what is the result of that? You are then recruitable. You can get a specific job. So we know there are 55 places. It's valid usually for 1 year, but for specialist competitions, usually it's 2 years or even more, until pretty much everyone who wants to be hired from the reserve list actually gets hired. So that's pretty much it. How to get the job? Well, you practice. You really put your mind to it and you take it seriously. If you heard me speak on other webinars, you probably heard me say it's like a sports preparation, that you need to practice consistently and be focused. Maybe 10 to 12 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 20 weeks. It really depends on where you are right now in abstract verbal numerical reasoning. How much do you know about the subject matter? What are your interview skills? You need to take some form of an evaluation of where you are and create a plan. So prepare an hour a day or 10 hours per week, whatever it is, make a plan and stick to it. Learn the methodology, because there's a lot more than what I just shared with you. You can find ways to quickly find answers for numerical reasoning or abstract or any other. There's a lot that you can learn on how to do it right, not just brute force going into it. And then being persistent is really what matters. It's not like you're enthusiastic for 2 weeks, then you give it up, or you try to catch up with everything in the last 2 weeks. And then doing lots of simulations, whether with our services or elsewhere, but do familiarize yourself with the layout of the interface, with the whole idea, and then answering questions under time pressure. So obviously, we're happy to recommend our own services, which you might want to check out. We have so many resources there. We're proud to offer 19 languages for verbal reasoning. So almost all the 24 EU official languages are covered. We are at 19, and we're still planning to add even more. So hopefully you'll find your first language there and you can practice. And also for numerical reasoning, we're offering it in, I believe, 5, perhaps even more languages. And then for abstract, obviously, the language is not an important aspect. And then tons of webinars are out there, a lot of free webinars, whether it's with me or someone else from our team. Check those out, and hopefully they will get you on the right track. And then ebooks and everything else. And I'd like to call your attention to the training services we offer and the personal coaching. We have 2 excellent coaches with fantastic feedback, and they are very happy to help you, whether in small groups or individually, to make your preparation worth it. So the EPSO Facebook community I mentioned, my book, another resource that you might want to check out. And here's the discount while I leave that on the screen and while I check out the many questions that have come in since my previous answer session. So let's look at it. How the written test, what will the written test will look like? Is it like multiple choice test? No, the written test is not multiple choice. It's part of the assessment center. And typically, and again, I give you the typical scenario, it can take 2 forms. Either they give you some background documents that you need to analyze, and you need to draft some essay or a briefing or some document on the basis of those background documents. Option number 2, and this is more likely in the case of this competition, is that they ask you a big open question and you just write there your best answers. So big open question could be something related to the farm to fork strategy and what are your thoughts on it? Or it could be something on the greening of the common agricultural policy and what is your assessment for the next 5 years. Something quite open, related to the field, obviously, and then you provide your answers. So there, what really matters is a lot of things to clear writing, to properly articulating your answers, making sure that the substance is really accurate and to the point. So all of those things come into play for this kind of exercise. If the computer-based test is part of the assessment center, do we still need to compete, or is it enough to pass with 50%? As far as I know, and again, I would probably this should be in the notice of competition. So the concrete, accurate answer should be there. But as far as I remember, it's enough in that scenario. It's enough to pass with 50%. So if there are not so many candidates, and they make the computer-based test as part of the assessment center, typically it's enough to pass with 50% score, or the way they describe it, 50% for verbal and 50% for the combined abstract and numerical. And again, we'll double check it in the notice of competition, but as far as I know, this tends to be the rule, because in such a case, there are not so many candidates that they would need to make it so strict, the threshold to pass. All right, question number 13. I can obtain full marks in one of the questions of the talent screener, but 0 in another question. Do you think it's a good idea to apply? It's absolutely a good idea to apply, because just because one of the answers you're not going to get a score for, because they might ask, I'm not familiar with the questions that they ask in this particular competition, but they might ask one question on, do you have experience in developing countries? And you have no experience in developing countries, that's okay. So as long as you reach sufficient number of points overall in the talent screener, that is enough. So just because some questions you say, no, I don't have that experience, that's okay. Okay, number 14. Is it possible to choose to do verbal reasoning in the second language? No, unfortunately, no. So the computer-based tests are always in language 1. So abstract verbal numerical reasoning is in your language 1. So that is why it's important that you choose carefully language 1 and carefully language 2. All right, what else did I miss? 16 to 21. Okay, lots of questions here. Talent screener. Could you please give some hints how to better separate the descriptions of nature of the work and your specific role and responsibilities in the talent screener, describing your work experience? So the nature of the work is what is the job description, and your specific role and responsibility is what you did specifically in the job. So let's say I could say my responsibility at EU training is I deal with strategy and I look at the big picture and where the company is going and how we are providing the best possible EPSO preparation for the largest number of candidates. That's sort of the nature of the work or the job description. What I do on a daily basis and what my contribution is, I'm running a webinar on the EPSO Sustainable Agriculture Competition in February, and I share my insights with a couple hundred candidates. So I think this is, one is the framework, the other one is the content. So hopefully that gives some indication. And of course, what you actually do in the work is really important. That's where those proof points become really important to demonstrate you have a certain experience. All right, next one. EPSO values more professional experience or education? I don't think it's an either or question, because given the formal requirements that we've discussed, you need to have a certain background or certain diploma or degree, and you also need to have the work experience. So from EPSO's perspective, they look at it with a very detached or impersonal or neutral way and say, do you have this? Do you have this? Tick, tick, tick. We tick those boxes. When it comes to the recruitment, so once you are on the reserve list and DG Agri says, who am I going to hire from this list? They will likely look at both your background and your professional experience. And perhaps professional experience counts more. Because if you have a degree in agricultural sciences, and then you worked specifically on, let's say, smallholders and small-scale farming in developing countries, and that's exactly that they want to look at, and that's the position they want to fill needs exactly that sort of expertise, chances are they will pick you. So it's really about relevance to the actual job. But then again, this is at the recruitment phase beyond EPSO. It has nothing to do with EPSO itself. What else? On Talent Screener, what if one doesn't have limited experience in one or more areas mentioned? How does it reduce the chance to pass to the next stage? Well, it's what I just mentioned a moment ago. It's really on getting sufficient number of points because you have demonstrated the existence of a certain experience. If you answer no or leave blank certain parts because you truly have no experience there, yes, then it can definitely reduce your chances. So it's really trying to get as many points as possible while being 100% truthful and accurate. I think we're almost at the end of our time. So I see that there are maybe 4 questions. So if you are courageous enough to hang on, let me see if I can quickly answer them. 30 seconds each. As there are rules to change a DG, so move from a directorate general to another after a certain period of time. You get selected to this competition. Doesn't mean you stay in DG Agri forever, or you can change your directorate general. Yes, you're locked in a room and you're not allowed to leave for until the day of your retirement. No, certainly you can leave after a while. They will probably very strongly discourage, to say the least, you from leaving within 3 years or so. So that's pretty much the minimum you are required, obliged, encouraged to stay. But after that period of time, perhaps it's 4, perhaps something similar, you have the so-called mobility. So you can go to another directorate general or perhaps even to another EU institution while keeping your salary and keeping your administrative status. And then 19 and 23, it seems that a key is the talent screener is key. So it seems that the motivation is not as important. Or is it going to be evaluated or determine the chances? So the motivation that you need to fill in when you are filling in your EPSO application on the profile, it's not that important, honestly. You want to put their stuff which is meaningful. You're not going to put their anything or leave it blank or be overly short, but it doesn't have an impact on your scores. So this particular competition doesn't have a motivational interview, which other competitions tend to have. So they might read the motivation, but it doesn't really impact your application chances. And then final question, says number 23, which I can see. Oh yeah, here. Relevant experience of 3 years back in 2008 and not recent. Is it a problem? It shouldn't be a problem, as far as I can tell. So as long as you have it, whether it was some time ago, I mean, no one says that it has to have happened in the past 3 years or your most recent experience. As long as you have the 3 years of relevant experience in your professional background, that should qualify you. Where it might be a little more challenging, again, is at the time of recruitment, but that's a separate matter. So for the sake of the competition, as long as you meet that formal criterion, then you should be eligible. Voila. I think we're done. And that's pretty much it that I wanted to share with you. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I was very open and honest with you about some questions that I was not 100% sure about. I gave you my perspective, but always check the official sources. If you are in doubt, you might contact the selection board through their functional mailbox, not individually, not on LinkedIn. Make sure you contact them through formal channels, but do contact me through LinkedIn, sign me up and connect with me professionally. That's my social network of choice. And then connect with our team on EU training. A big thanks to Lenke and Veronica for being so professional, putting together the presentation and helping us share the best information out there with everyone. Good luck. This is an amazing opportunity for everyone in agricultural sciences. It's an area which I personally find fascinating. I work with some clients on similar areas, and fight the good fight, do the good thing, and join the European Commission through this competition, and wishing you a great career and great success in preparation. If we can help you with anything else, here's our email. Send us a message and connect with us through our website, contact form, or any other way. We're happy to share information, whatever we have, and or point you to the resources that we have available. So with that, share the information with peers, colleagues, and others who are interested. And to be continued, thanks very much for being here. And thanks very much, especially those who dialed in from so far away. And a big thanks to our Europe-based fellow candidates as well. So good. Have a nice rest of your day and stay in touch.